As you might notice, we have several cameras around here. One of our fellow students, Nicole Price, is working on a documentary, and so she's going to talk to you about that a little bit for a second.
Thanks, Garrett. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Price. Just a quick heads up, so there are a number of cameras, like Garrett said. Some of them are run by the organization, but Connor in the corner over there, ooh, I'm getting some feedback already. And I down over here are gathering some footage for a documentary with a working title called From Campus to Congress. It's basically kind of a nonpartisan look at campuses as a microcosm for American society, and we really wanted to be here today to look at all these students who are interested in talking about topics that affect Americans every day, and really just kind of get a feel for, being on campus and seeing students who are actively participating in the American system. So we will be passing around an appearance form. This just lets us use any footage that we gather of you directly in our documentary. We will not include anything that involves your voice. Like if you ask a question, we get footage of it and you don't want it, we won't put it in. But if you ask a question and they answer and we have a release of you, just means that we can use it if we choose to. So feel free to not sign it or sign it if you'd like. Just a quick show of hands. Is there anyone here right now who knows that they will not sign this form? Okay, cool. What I might do is talk to you guys independently because I don't know if I have enough space for everybody who will. So, thanks everybody, and if you guys are interested in looking at it, it'll be playing in Main Street Cinema on April 26th at 7 p.m. Thanks.
Okay, and without further ado, I would like to welcome you all to the Great Debate 6. This is our 6th semesterly debate that the Young Americans for Liberty host every semester to make sure that students on campus are engaged in the topics that are affecting them on a daily basis. Today we have the Socialist Alternative, the UC College Republicans, the UC Democrats, and the Young Americans for Liberty. We'll be going over 4 topics, and then we will have a Q&A. We ask during the Q&A that you keep it to a question, not to a soliloquy. And if you guys can't abide by that, I will take the microphone back. And we do ask, you guys can absolutely applaud or stuff, but we ask no catcalling or any disturbances from you guys during the debate. Now I'm going to introduce our moderator. He went to University of Indiana and got a major in criminology and political science, and then came to the University of Cincinnati to get his PhD in criminology. He currently is a professor in our School of Criminal Justice. Dr. Wright.
Just laying out the ground rules here. We're going to have a 2-minute intro for each group. We'll lay out what the principles are, the first principles, how they see the world, and sort of their ideological views of government and individuals. After that, we'll start with each question block. They don't know the questions. They know there are some questions about education, income equality, and so forth. They will have a minute and a half to lay out their argument, and then each group will have a minute in response. If they can, use a 30-second card at that. We'll do our best to keep them disciplined, but with this group, you never know. It's important to remember that there are no enemies in here, that their job here is to speak, to convince, to argue in a way that's straightforward and disciplined, and trying to convince you of a position or a positional change. So we have a lot of intellectual diversity on here. And I think with that, we're ready to go. So the Young Americans. Socialists.
Press. My name's Kevin. I'm a UC alum 2014. Jules and I are here with Socialist Alternative. Broadly as socialists, we fight to end injustices, exploitations people face every day in the workplaces, communities, and campuses. We stand against oppression and bigotry in all its forms, and while we do win and hold elected offices, we see the transformation of society dependent upon the formation of a new, full, and transparent democracy. The demand the current system will not bring us without struggle and upheaval. When we look at the history of struggles against slavery, labor rights, child labor laws, the 2-day weekend, the 8-hour workday, social security, women's suffrage, civil rights, these were not granted freely and benevolently. In many ways, we still need to fully win those things and have them be fully realized, but even those gains that were made at that time weren't voted into existence by the masses of people that were cut out of the system already, but rather they're fighting against that very system through mass movements during times of social upheaval. They put demands on the system itself to change or be torn apart. We need to continue these movements and the struggle for justice outside of the two parties dominated by big business and carry out what many of these movements have set their eyes on in the past and what we must still achieve moving forward. As socialists, we demand full rights of all people to self-determination, education, healthcare, elimination of bigotry in all its forms, and democratic workplaces. Electing a representative to political office once every 2 to 4 years is not enough. It's time to recognize that we live in a system where our workplaces are democracy-free zones, where we are necessarily underpaid in order for a profit to be made. Workers are divided and pitted against one another, and the full development of human beings is subservient to market forces and profit. And this is where we disagree most with YAL. Much of what libertarians say about the coercive nature of the state, the military-industrial complex, crony capitalist dysfunction, we agree with them on those points. And that's why after we collectivize all the toothbrushes, libertarians will have the voluntary option to brush first or second. Kidding aside, so the way we fight the corrupt status quo, truly maximize autonomy and achieving the full development of each of us as individuals, is through banding together into larger units as we begin to see ourselves as a broad class of wage earners, of workers whose interests are broadly aligned. Even while we may disagree on this or that nuance, the reality is all around us that the system is failing the vast majority of us. We are working longer hours for lower wages, debt is increasing in all forms. I'll end on this. Tuition is at an all-time high, as you all know. Cost of living is up. We have levels of income and wealth inequality not seen since the Great Depression, impending climate catastrophe, social and public health crises. Spurred poverty has led to mass substance dependency, not to mention skyrocketing suicide rates and the grotesque upswing in hate groups. The time to fight back is long overdue, and that means demanding a living wage, the right to organize in the workplace, expanding public education and healthcare to all people. Using a fraction of what we spend on war, we can do all of this and more. A better future is possible. Thank you.
My name is David Bertel, and I'm the UC College Republican President. I'm joined by Dylan Bruiser, who's also a club member. I would like to thank Dr. Wright for moderating this debate and the audience for coming out to watch. We're definitely discussing some of the biggest topics going on in our country today. As Republicans, we believe in conservative values, fiscal responsibility, limited government, the freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, peace through strength rather than strength through peace, and a free market economy. As a club, we take pride in spreading conservatism on UC's campus in Hamilton County. We're proud to be the best party on campus since 1854.
My name is Peter Vandrasky, and I am Outreach Director for UC Democrats. I'd like to go and thank everyone else on this panel, as well as the moderator, Dr. Wright, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming out, because no matter what your political persuasion, our current political participation among our younger demographic is sadly low, and we need that to be higher. And part of the reason why it's so low is people have been discouraged. People have been discouraged from participating in the political system because they see a system that is rigged against them. They see that they cannot go and compete to get the same types of jobs that their parents had, where they can support a full family. You're seeing wages that are minuscule compared to what we had in the past. Yet, we see factors such as structural racism. We see factors such as sexism still holding back different groups. We want to go and level the playing field. We want to ensure that everybody has a fair shot at a free and open democracy. That if you want to start a business, you can start a business. If you want to pursue education, you have access to that education. We want to make sure everyone has a fair shot at an open political system, and we're here to actually elect candidates and craft policies that do that. We're not here to just debate ideas that only exist in the hypothetical. We want to actually use government to create realistic ways to improve people's lives. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Drake, and I'm with Young Americans for Liberty, along with Charlie here. First, I want to say thank you for coming out. This event has grown a lot since the first time we hosted it in some dark room in ERC to 40 people. And a lot of that is due to everyone else on stage being willing to come up here and put their ideas to the test, which is the most important thing and what is so sorely lacking right now. I'm here to defend liberty and defend capitalism. 150 years ago, the United States was a third world country. 100 years ago, 90% of the world was in absolute poverty. Now it's under 9%. Those advances to the living standard, especially the poorest people among us, have been due to free markets and capitalism. And we, as libertarians, are here to say, you own your body, you own your property, you can do with it what you want, and you should not be hurt by anyone else. If you want to smoke a plant, if you want to hire someone, if you want to sleep with someone, those are not government problems. No one runs your life better than you do. And I am happy to live in a country that is a constitutionally limited republic rather than a democracy where you have two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Thank you.
Heads up. Heads up.
This break, okay, go.
Board.
Yeah, I'm afraid here. Let's see.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? There we go.
All right, so we've got the tag figured out, hopefully. All right, so we're going to start off with YAL, correct? And we're starting off with education. So, I know it's going to come to a surprise to a lot of you guys, but college education is extremely expensive. 12 grand, 15 grand a year, tuition, then they hit you with all the fees, and they hit you with everything else, and books, and on and on and on, right? In fact, the cost of education, higher education, has increased faster than anything else in our society, faster than purchase of a home and everything, right? Student loan debt now exceeds the debt associated with capital, with credit cards. This is your debt, right? What should we do about this? Is there a way to drive down tuition? Is there a way to drive it down without affecting the quality of higher education? If so, what are the answers?
The problem with education right now is that you're not getting an education in years K to 12. Because of the United States failing school system, starting with the creation of the Department of Education in the 1980s, the United States public school system has gone downhill. The centralization and lack of choice in public school has created this, while we look at the United States colleges where you still have a lot of choice, where it's mostly centralized, and they are by far the best in the world. If we're looking at models to follow, since that's what we tend to look towards, countries like South Korea, countries like Japan or Finland allow school choice. Many of them have a third or higher of their schools as private, and that has dramatically improved the quality of education. In terms of college costs specifically, the problem is that student loans have been given too freely. I know it's a bit hard to hear, but if every single person can get a student loan for very low interest rate, and we tell everyone that they have to go to school, the more people want school, the higher the cost goes. Why do you think that UC has record-breaking enrollment every single year? It's the same for colleges across the country. If everyone wants to go to school, the price will increase, and the only way to properly curb that price is to let students actually bear it now instead of loans that destroy their future. Thank you.
So without affecting quality, and rather an increase in quality can be achieved, to answer your question, without a price increase. In fact, it could be free. And let's first shatter the myth that anything is truly free. The $70 billion that the U.S. just spent on defense was not free. It would have paid for 4 years of higher education for anyone eligible, but instead it's building bonds for the war machine. So better still, let's put that money into Social Security, a tax on hedge fund transactions of even 1%, and we pay for college education for everyone. It's not a lack of funds that is the problem here. It's a matter of power. Large corporations, banks, Wall Street hedge funds do not pay their fair share, and the rest of society is picking up the tab. We should demand quality education as a basic human right. There is the cultural and social enrichment aspect, where we receive enrichment through studying what we choose, as well as the economic and employment opportunities we get from higher education, which is integral to the full development of each individual within society. But when we look closely at the funding of education, we understand that every dollar of public investment in education positively correlates with additional completed years of education, results in higher wages, a reduction in the annual incidence of adult poverty, and pays back 5 to 1 in savings and investment throughout the rest of the economy when we invest in education. Why, what we should ask is, why is it that a student who's willing and able to get an education should be forced, based on the income of their parents, into large amounts of debt, burdening them for decades to come?
Education is not just a good. Education is not only morally right, but it is a necessary investment for our future. American businesses, their success has come from having a large pool of capital knowledge of people who have the brains to actually do these jobs. That has come from our higher education system. This libertarian idea that we should just ignore or deny school loans because of who, in order to get prices down, that's not an option. We need to ensure the continuing greatness, we need to ensure the continual prosperity of our nation, and that is by ensuring that people have the knowledge to actually get better jobs and compete in a marketplace where now you can't, for many jobs, you need a college education. You need the actual skills to compete in the marketplace. Having a college education is necessary, and it should be on the part of the government to assist in that regard. At some level, the state, the nation, is going to have to fund college education. It is going to have to help students alleviate their debts, because it is more than just a moral right, it's an economic incentive as well.
So similar to the libertarians, we also believe it kind of starts with the K through 12. I just feel like how it's set up now with Common Core. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Albert Einstein once said, everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. So I believe it was originally a great idea, but over time it's just becoming way too focused on standardized testing. I believe that schools should compete for students the same way businesses have to compete for customers. I firmly believe that this will help strengthen public and private schools alike. I also believe that parents should be able to choose where their students go to school. And back to the question, I really don't think, kind of different from the Democrats' point of view, I don't think that the state should be in charge of paying for education. College education isn't a right. We can take out loans, pay for it our own way. There's a lot of different options other than just taking out loans. For instance, I went to a community college my first 2 years, and once I graduate, it's going to say, graduate from University of Cincinnati. There's also military options, or just working your way. I have several friends who have 2 to 3 jobs and work their butts off, and also there's trade schools, so it's not a one-size-fits-all.
1 minute response.
So first, I'd like to thank the Socialists and Democrats for proving my point. They're both admitting that high school K-12 doesn't prepare you for the real world. They're saying the public school system has failed you, so let's have private universities get paid by the government to make up for how the public school system failed you. I'm saying let's start with that failure and fix it, rather than trying to just add more years of public education paid for by the government to fix a failing system. The public school system in the United States has less than 59% of black males even graduating high school. If you're saying we have free college for everyone, how does that matter for the people who don't even get in? Or, man, education is a really, really vital right, so we need to provide it free for everyone. You know what's more vital than education? Food. Do we want, like, free food provided by the government? You know, Venezuela, USSR? I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'd like to respond to that. I am not saying in no way that K-12 fails you. That is completely wrong. What it is not enough. You need more. K-12 prepares you for college, which prepares you. The problem with K-12 is that we are having states, specifically states led by Republicans and other right-wing individuals, cut public funding for education. You look at West Virginia. The teachers had to go on strike for a week in West Virginia just to get a living wage. States such as Kansas, Oklahoma, even our home state of Ohio, have been giving drastic cuts to public education. That's why it hasn't been doing well. In our own state of Ohio, our Republican leadership, they've been cutting public education to try and get charter schools, this idea of school choice. Yet that's been an absolute failure. Charter schools, on average, we end up paying, the state, your taxpayer dollars, end up having to pay the charter schools and our students more funds than we would have with public education, and we end up with lower academic results. We need to invest more money into public education as well.
I don't really care if you think school is a right or not, but the facts that we're dealing with right now are that students are in 11 times more debt than our parents were, and I think that we need to address that. We implicate like bloated administration, predatory lending practices, and profit-driven college campuses. And if we take all of those a step further, the debt relationships that we're all getting ourselves into right now really just serve the interest of big businesses. They now have a more precarious labor force who will work for longer hours, for lower pay, to make their loan repayments, all while trying to keep up a standard of living. And I kind of pose this question to the panel: why do we think it's okay to burden ourselves with more debt now than ever before? How does this make a healthy society if we're all struggling to keep our heads above water? And what should we do to organize and fight back?
So I'd like to start, you mentioned the predatory loans and the process as to how they're handing out loans. So in 2008, we saw the housing market crash because banks were signing off loans to people at ridiculously high interest rates, and they were signing off these loans to people who could not afford them. So what we're seeing the government doing is they're doing the exact same thing that the banks did in 2008, as they're signing off these ridiculous loans at low interest rates to students who cannot afford to pay back college, either now or in the future. So in 2008, when that happened, we saw the government roll huge regulations on the banks and how you apply for housing loans. Why are we not doing the same thing to the government right now? Why are we saying that the solution to this problem where government has been handing out these ridiculous student loans to people, why are we saying that it's now up to the government to fix it themselves? Also, I think what we also need to look at is, since we like to see the socialists and Democrats mention Europe as the prime example for college, so in Germany, they accept up to about 10 to 5% of people into secondary education, such as universities. The rest, they basically say, go off and learn a trade. Germany currently has one of the lowest rates of student debt, and we have one of the largest and most powerful economies in the world. Because they are telling their students, you do not have to go to college just to get an education. Go and learn a trade. An electrical engineer out of college will earn roughly $43,000 a year, while an electrician who graduates from a trade school in 2 years with no student loan debt will earn up to about $50,000 a year and will continue to grow and grow at a much higher rate than electrical engineers will.
Man, a lot to hit here. So, first things first, I very much agree. Trade schools are a way to solve this problem. Countries like Sweden, Germany, and Japan all have an option to go to a high school that is a trade school focused, and I would prefer that was enlarged in the United States, but since we have a one-size-fits-all solution with Common Core, it has been decreasing year by year as an option for people, even though if you go into something like welding, you can make 6 figures a year easily. In terms of burdening yourselves with student loan debt, I agree that is a burden a lot of people shouldn't be taking. Less than a third of students that go to university graduate and get a job in their major. A lot of people that you know on this campus maybe shouldn't be here. But the way to fix that is to research and know what you're doing. It's the reason my girlfriend and brother both dropped out of UC and did a different program to find a job. And they both have jobs making around $60,000 a year, more than I have when I'm about to graduate as a mechanical engineer. College isn't for everyone, and if we keep pushing that and tell everyone they have to go, the costs will keep increasing, and that's all there is to it.
Okay. I'll respond to this topic of trade schools. I support trade schools. I think if you want to go to a trade school, you should have that option, and there should be less of a stigma around trade schools. But at the same time, we do need college-educated individuals for the workforce. We need people who have studied the arts, the sciences, other individuals to create innovations and to drive this economy forward. There's more than one option. We're not saying just all trade schools or all college. We're saying we need a variety of American workers in order to create the best society possible. And we want to make it that no matter which option you have, it's as easy as possible for you to pursue that option.
Okay, yeah, that was the last section on education, but we're going to move to the opioid crisis. And I'm sure for for some of you, you've had to deal with this firsthand. You've had people in your family, you know, someone that's been affected by drug and alcohol addiction or problems with opioids and the heroin epidemic that we have right now. There's study after study shows that young people, relatively young adults, are much more inclined to legalize marijuana, much more inclined to legalize other types of drugs than were prior groups. So the question I want to pose to you is this, right? One, do you support drug legalization as an effort to reduce harm? And second, if we find out that it doesn't reduce harm, are you willing to admit it and go back to restricting narcotics? It's a tough thing. Lives hang in the balance. Legalize, find out what happens. We get it wrong, people die. What's your position?
All right, well, so first I just want to say that right now, opioid overdose is the leading cause of death for us, for people under 50. In fact, 115 people in America die every single day from opioid use. And legalization is not going to stop those people from dying. This is not an isolated issue that can be solved with a one-size-fits-all answer. It's part of a bigger crisis in our society right now. Issues like growing unemployment, stagnant wages, and cuts to social services and healthcare, especially in these marginalized working class communities like our state of Ohio has tons of. This is what happens, you know, when jobs leave and people are left in hopeless poverty with no help, no path to relief. And there's also a strong link between mental health, like depression and opioid use. So just legalizing drugs is not going to make people not be depressed anymore. To actually solve this crisis, we need to address the root causes in our society that lead people down a path of addiction. And those causes are poverty, lack of health care, lack of affordable housing. These conditions create the epidemic. So the way we solve this is by demanding that we shift government spending away from things like our bloated military and towards public education, towards a jobs program, and affordable housing. We have to recognize that this is a symptom of the capitalist system that we're living in.
So last year, 64,000 Americans died from drug overdoses. To put that into perspective, over 58,000 people lost their lives during Vietnam. I believe that it's time to rely less on the criminal justice system and more on the public health system when it comes to the opioid epidemic. Our jails are at an all-time high because of the war on drugs. I believe that once you are addicted to legal opioids, people tend to seek out the illegal ones, such as heroin, once they can't afford or receive prescriptions. 1 out of every 3 people who were prescribed opioids last year for more than 2 months became addicted, according to the Washington Post. In order to solve the opioid epidemic, we have to prevent more people from becoming addicted. This requires much more than cautious prescribing. According to the Journal of Health and Economics, last year, since Colorado has legalized marijuana, deaths from heroin has gone down 25%. Also, legalizing marijuana will generate over $500 million in new sales tax in Ohio per year. In 2016, more than 11 million Americans abuse prescription opioids, and although millions of Americans are addicted to opioids, only 1 in 10 actually get treatment. I believe that is too often addicts get released after their 30-day stints and have no support system and no one to help with their everyday struggle to stay sober.
I will say first, it makes me very happy to start seeing the rest of the country come on board with marijuana legalization and joining the libertarians with an issue that they've been pushing for since the 80s. Besides that, it's important to look and notice that the opioid epidemic is new. It wasn't going on back before heroin and other drugs were made illegal, there was not an overdose and death epidemic happening at that time. The opioid epidemic has happened since the start of the war on drugs. When you make drugs illegal, people buy them without knowing what's actually in it. People shoot needles full of powdered cement into their veins. People think they're buying heroin and actually buying fentanyl and kill themselves. When we look at countries like Switzerland with their clinics for giving out heroin prescribed and controlled by a doctor, they have had 0 overdoses in those clinics. We look at a place like Portugal, which has decriminalized any amount of drugs up to 10-day supply. We see a dramatic reduction in overdose deaths and even a decrease in addiction as a whole. The solution is not one size fits all. Legalization will not solve every single problem, but it's a darn good place to start.
You know, I have to say, I was very pleasantly surprised listening to the Republicans talk about opioid crisis. They talked about the need for more public health, the need to shift it away from a criminal issue, make it a public health issue. These are things we very much are in support of. The issue is, how do we actually act on it on a public health issue? We need to have funding for healthcare in order to ensure that people can get access to treatment for their addictions, which is a disease. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, a lot of the candidates the Republicans have been supporting have not been fighting for that. In Ohio, 65% of the money we use to fight the opioid epidemic is from the Medicaid expansion. Yet none of the Republican candidates for governor have said that they would continue to support the Medicaid expansion in Ohio. Also, Republican candidate or House Representative Steve Shabbat here, Republican Senator Rob Portman, and the Republican Senate candidate Jim Renacci, they've all voted to cut Medicaid by $800 million, even though that's essential for getting opioid treatment. It's one thing to talk, it's one thing to actually act and put the money behind treating this epidemic.
The first 4 years of President Obama, he spent more money for more raids on marijuana dispensaries than the entire 16 years of Clinton and Bush combined. Under Obama, I believe in 2015, under his watch, marijuana was rescheduled as a class 1 drug on the same level as heroin and kept from people that need it. I'm not implicating the people here on stage, but I'm saying that both parties, the establishment, has been resoundingly against marijuana and continue to be, even with growing public support, and a lot of that has to do with money from pharmaceutical companies. But once again, legalization is a way to fix that, especially marijuana, and going through the rest. Yeah, that's most of it. Just wanted to point out Democrats.
Well, yes, there have been Democratic presidents in the past, Democratic administrations, who have done stuff that the current party agrees now were bad. But, you know what? We're not in the mood to just go and fling attacks. We want to actually think of policies that help people. And that is adding more funding for public health, putting the resources behind Medicaid, behind Medicare, having public health expansion so that we can actually go and treat this opioid crisis. And we agree with you now. I 100% agree that we need marijuana legalization. And to be the one to actually address the original question, I do believe there needs to be studies on it, but I think there is currently enough evidence now where it is believed to be safe enough that we can legalize it. And looking at the states where it has been legalized, it has been successful. So, I want more studies on it. I think now is the time where we can actually legalize it.
So the Libertarians raised an interesting question. Why is there an opioid epidemic currently when it's been around for decades? We're still on the downward spiral of a recession, and that begins to explain the increase. And then it's represented by the clear shift that we see in the young Republicans. The youth are on board now with what the latest data is telling us, that the genetic component, the Hooks hypothesis, that you were born an addict, are far less a factor than a systemic analysis of the precarious nature and instability of the addicted person's life. They're not addicts to be maligned, but rather people in pain using coping mechanisms for very clear reasons. When we don't view drug policy through the lens of crime and punishment with punitive measures, but look at harm reduction, rehabilitation, jobs alongside legalization.
As I was saying before, I definitely believe that legalizing marijuana, as we can see in states like Colorado and Washington, have definitely benefited those states. You've seen dramatic drops in heroin overdoses, more tax revenue for the state, and I just believe that we need to realize that with pain, opioids are vital. However, outside of severe pain, they are deadly.
I'll take it. We'd like you to be on
Sorry, we're too late. I know, a real problem in current politics. So I would like to point out that currently in California, they're actually having to lower the tax on marijuana because they've kept the taxes so high that it's actually made the black market continue just because marijuana is taxed so heavily. So we can't just tax marijuana to the moon, and as libertarians, we're in favor of reducing taxes across the board. Besides that, it's important to look at not just marijuana having benefits. There have been studies showing that mushrooms can be used to treat intense cases of PTSD, especially those inflicting veterans. And there are other substances, such as heroin is actually used as a pain reliever instead of morphine, is less addictive and is used throughout Europe. So a lot of these other substances do have medical and legitimate uses as well, and the current stigma that they suffer in American society is simply not correct. Yeah.
That guy likes to clap. Again, I would just like to say I am 100%, very surprisingly, in agreement with what the Republicans have been saying. We support marijuana legalization. We support using public health to fight the opioid crisis. But again, it's one thing to say things, it's another thing to act on it. The Republican Attorney General has been one of the most vehement actors in fighting marijuana legalization. The Republican candidate, or the Republican representative right now, Republican senator right now, and the Republican Senate candidate that we all have all been voting to cut Medicaid, which makes it harder to treat opioids as a public health crisis. Voting is the one thing you can do to actually enact change in your government. You can get people to actually enact the policies you claim to support, and that's what we have to do. It's one thing to talk, it's another thing to put your action into a vote.
We'll start a fight.
Okay, so I feel like we're kind of playing whack-a-mole with this issue, like an addict pops up and we try to cure them or whatever, but what we really need to be addressing is the fundamental root of the cause of this problem. The addiction rates have spiked in this country, and it's not a coincidence. It's not because everybody just decided they like drugs all of a sudden. It's because there's a fundamental crisis in our system that keeps people poor, that keeps them hopeless, that keeps them without opportunity, that keeps them without health or food or affordable housing to feed their families with. This is not, it's not that everybody's decided they like drugs all of a sudden. This is a response to a sick system, and the only way to solve that is a complete democratic restructuring of our society.
The socialists keep bringing up the same idea, and it's that everything in this country is dismal because we're all poor and all that. But I think that's really not what the facts show at all. We've had most government expenditure in history, and yet they still think we're dismal. World poverty is lower than it's ever been. We live in one of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world, but they think that we're all going to do drugs because we're so poor and none of us have jobs, when our unemployment rate is around 5%, incredibly low. Much lower than Europe. So I think it's really not true at all if we look at the facts that we live in a society where everyone is poor and hopeless.
Okay. Next section, we'll start off with UC Democrats, and this is on income inequality. I think we apprehend how this one might go. A couple models on ideas on income inequality, two types of perspectives. The first is that it's not a bad thing as long as it's not too great. That income inequality represents sort of the freedom of the capital market, and people sort of find their way through life and acquire wealth and so forth at various levels. The other idea is one that any type of inequality needs to have some type of government intervention to narrow it as much as possible. We've seen other countries do this by strong welfare state policies that include everything from education and healthcare, high capital government expenditures in those areas relative to everything else, and high taxation. The United States is clearly a capitalist economy. We've all benefited. This great institution is built off of a capitalist system. Right? My question to you is this: is income inequality the great boogeyman that people believe it to be? Is it worthy of strong government intervention to reduce it? And if so, how far are you willing to go?
Well, I find it nice the way the libertarians ended their last thing, talking about the current state of the world. Specifically, they brought up the 4% unemployment we currently have. And yes, it's true, we are one of the richest countries in the world. World poverty has gone down, and our unemployment is very low. But our wages haven't caught up. Our wages are dramatically lower than where they were 50 years ago. You can no longer go, on average wages, you can't support a family like you could before. Our minimum wage has not kept up with inflation, and you cannot get a normal job and support a family. We want policies that level the playing field. Because if you don't have a base level of solid income, if you don't have a base level of solid education, then you aren't going to have the opportunity to get better jobs, to fight to get a better income. Income inequality, I'm not saying for a complete massive redistribution of wealth, to answer your question, but I do think it requires some level of intervention to level the playing field and allow people to have a fair shot at getting a higher income.
So when we talk about addressing income and wealth inequality directly, we may hear solutions about implementing UBI, a negative tax rate, or even the way the moderator mentioned in secondary ways, kind of increasing public education, increased wages, reducing healthcare costs, affordable housing, and so on. Even then, we can't look at policy adjustments in a vacuum. Rather, we still have to get at the root causes of these inequities. why a small percent are separated from the vast majority at an increasing rate. We're on kind of the upswing of income and wealth inequality. It's actually increasing right now, the disparity. So on one hand, we should be calling for expanding the social safety net, creating more well-paying jobs, reforming an unjust system that perpetuates inequality by criminalizing poverty, while also recognizing that income and wealth inequality are inevitable outcomes when you have a highly stratified, divided class society which upholds the ideal of private profit above public goods. I'd like to talk about why reforms aren't enough. Our Democrat friends will have lots of reforms to propose. Even welfare states in Europe are feeling the full assault of austerity policies, freezing wages and public pensions, and these are passed by social democratic governments, the so-called left of Europe. The libertarians may say, well, they saw the logic of the system and came to their senses. In a way, we agree that they opened their eyes and obeyed the logic of an unjust system that puts profit over people and cuts pensions to adjust for inflation, while allowing for too big to fail banks to grow even bigger than before the 2008 crash. Addressing inequality forces us to look at these forces directly, the dictates of the market, the profit motive, private versus public ownership, and ask ourselves, what do we call a system that takes the wealthiest country in the history of civilization and renders half of its population poor or low income? I call that a failed system. We can and we need to go beyond capitalism.
So, as Republicans, we're obviously big fans of capitalism. I think everyone in this room really should be, because that iPhone, laptop, that Starbucks that you grab every day, that's a part of capitalism. That's part of a capitalist market. You have that choice in terms of increased wages. As we've seen, the way that we increase wages and the way that we make and we put people out of poverty is that we give businesses and we leave the market alone. We let the market grow without any kind of intervention. As we've seen, especially with lower tax cuts, Trump tax cuts go in. How many Fortune 500 companies came out and said, hey, instead of just taking in this lump sum of cash, we're going to divvy up $1,000 bonuses to our employees, or in the case of Fifth Third, increasing the minimum wage to $15. Now, you can sit here and argue that minimum wage laws are completely unconstitutional, but I think everyone here at one point when they got their first job has benefited in some way or another from the minimum wage. And I appreciated making $8.50 an hour when I started out in high school. But so what we can do to help income inequality is, like I said, leave the market alone. Let businesses grow. Let them continue to run without any kind of intervention, without having the government enforce these regulations on them that are not allowing them to grow and to redistribute their possible wealth that they could have through their employees.
Many years ago, an economist named Ludwig von Mises wrote, "Only because inequality of wealth is possible in our social order, only because it stimulates everyone to produce as much as he can and at the lowest cost, does mankind today have at its disposal the total annual wealth now available for consumption." And he goes on to say that if this were not the case, we wouldn't even have the wealth that we have to distribute if everyone was made equally, as Margaret Thatcher later on said, everyone would be equally poor, and accused people on the left of wanting that. But that's not what we want at all. The first thing I'd like to point out is that income inequality is mostly inevitable. Let me give you one example. It's because if everyone had an equal wage starting out when they were 20 years old, say $20,000, and each decade they got a $10,000 increase, because of this scheme, you would actually still see the top 20% of people having 40% of the wealth. There's so many factors that go into inequality that cannot be taken into account just by saying capitalism is evil. But furthermore, it's actually true that the more free a society, the higher share of wealth that lower wage earners have, and they tend to have actually higher wages, talking about the bottom 20% of society. So while it is inevitable that we will have some inequality, and this actually drives the creation of wealth in society as a whole, if we didn't have this, we actually wouldn't have the wealth that we have today. Well, I'd like to respond to what the Republicans were talking about market interventions. Because one of the things they said is that you just need to leave the market as it is, and somehow that's going to fix inequality. For one, I disagree with that, but also they haven't been leaving the market as is. Their tax cuts is single-handedly one of the largest redistributions of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of the world. And their tax cuts are single-handedly causing more income inequality. As you look across the next 10 years, taxes on the lower and middle classes are actually predicted to go up, yet taxes for the rich are going to keep going down. That's enshrining income inequality into our system. And with that, they brought up this idea that it's going to be all right because these Fortune 500 companies are giving out bonuses. Yet those are one-time bonuses. Those aren't actually, no one's been giving actual permanent wage increases since before the tax cut. They brought up Fifth Third, right? A lot of Fortune 500 companies, say Starbucks, for example, Walmart, that announced wage increases afterwards. Those were already planned out beforehand. The Republican policies have done nothing to combat income inequality. These right-wing policies are making it worse.
First of all, little known fact, we actually can still make cell phones under socialism, you guys. But more importantly, when people are literally dying on the street, like a homeless man did this winter at the bus stop, that to me is an example of the market failing the people. When thousands of families in this city can't find affordable places to live, and some people have multiple homes, that's a failed system. When children go hungry every single night, and meanwhile grocery store dumpsters are full of food that we're just throwing away, that's a failed system. I mean, a company like Amazon that has generated its shareholders billions of dollars paid no income tax. How is that an example of a system that is working for people? How are any of us going to be able to raise our families in comfort with that sort of system stacked against us?
Could everyone raise their hand if you or your parents own stock?
What?
So you guys are all the ones benefiting from this evil corporation called Amazon and all the other evil corporations when they do well in the economy. We are the shareholders. And how many people died under socialism? Someone can look up that number, it's pretty big. And it does cause a bad kind of inequality, and it's central banking. As we all know, we have inflation. It's because the central bank in the U.S. is the Federal Reserve, prints money. And when they print the money, it doesn't go to everyone at the same time. The people who get the money first are the people close to the financial markets. The banks, rich people who get a lot of loans, hedge funds, and companies like military companies who are paid by the government. These are the people who get the money first, get to spend it, and then once it works its way all the way down through the system, it finally gets to the lower class, but at that point, all the prices have risen. So what happens? The rich win when the government prints money and everyone else loses.
So I would agree, capitalism is better than everything that came before it. Feudalism, slave societies, monarchies, aristocracies, these are all bad things. We can agree on that. We agree that it's inevitable that there will be inequality on a massive scale, wealth inequality on a massive scale under capitalism. The unemployment rate, which is at this all-time low, is actually massively underestimated because it moves people off when they stop looking for work. Wages and purchasing power adjusted for inflation are actually, again, at all-time lows. 40 individuals owning half the wealth of the world, the libertarians will say, 30% of that, half the world are, would you cancel out their debt, which is a negative number, at zero. Thank you for proving our point. The iPhone. Let's look at some of the technologies in the iPhone. Wi-Fi, that was produced by public investment in Australia. The the computer microchip was Intel, which is public investment in MIT. The internet, that was Bill Clinton's vice president. So, you know, these, we could, you know, let's go back to shares. What do we mean when we say economic exploitation? 80% of U.S. company shares are owned by 1% of the population, not the people in this room. One share equals one vote in how a company is run. So that 1% elects 80% of the board members of a particular company. I'll end on this. So, you know, with the majority of control of that board, they choose what good and service to produce, where to produce it, what to charge, what to pay the workers, all based on what increases share value. The dividends are paid to the shareholders as profit and follow that motive therein. Again, the shareholders, 1% of them own 80% of the shares. In this room, are any of you in the 1% that own 80% of the shares? Is the correct question, and no.
So I know you brought up how, you know, the public can come together and create goods, as you mentioned with Australia and Wi-Fi, and that is true. But as we've seen is that we can see the private sector take something, work without any kind of limitations on it, and they can make it 1,000 times better. There's a reason why we use Time Warner Cable Wi-Fi, AT&T, as opposed to the city of Cincinnati or the state of Ohio officially licensed Wi-Fi in the state government. It's because private industries will take a product, they'll make it cheaper, they'll make it better, they can get it to you quicker, and it's, while you leave it up to the government, they're going to make it as expensive, they're making it slowly. The government in and of itself is inefficient. And the way that we get ourselves out of and the way we make things better is by leaving the private sector alone and letting them do their job.
Okay, I only have 40 seconds, and I'm trying to hit this really fast. So first off, the way that poverty is calculated around the world is that they calculate poverty based off 60% of the median wage of a country. So the poor in the United States are richer than the middle class in Poland, in Portugal, in Turkey, and many other OECD countries. When they talk about the US poor, they're still well off relative to the rest of the world. Also, if you're saying that a tax break is redistribution, the definition of a redistribution is taking it from someone and giving it to someone else. A tax break is not taking it. That's just not the definition of redistribution. It's also important to notice that if we're talking about government, government is one of the things that creates wealth inequality. The richest districts in America are the suburbs of Washington, D.C. When we're talking about the homeless and people dying in the streets, the government often makes it illegal to feed the homeless, illegal to house the homeless. There are swap rates on people housing the homeless all the time. Food is often thrown away because of government regulations. And finally, you are in the top 1% of the world. All of us are. If you're saying the top 1% is a problem, give away the vast majority of wealth to people in Africa, or you're a hypocrite. Thank you.
Okay. Criminal income inequality is so entertaining. Last topic for the night is America's love-hate relationship with guns. And this is the topic that is generating a lot of debate, a lot of public discussion. America, as we all know, has a very long history with private ownership of firearms, and today's debate is different. You now have people in major parties arguing for a repeal and replace of the Second Amendment, if you will, which is something very different than what we've had in the past, where people arguing for gun control or other types of restrictions. So I'd like to know first, from each of you, do you support the repeal of the Second Amendment? And if not, right, what types of gun control would you support? And what types of gun control would you not support?
The funny thing about repealing the Second Amendment is that if you repealed it, the right to bear arms would not go away. It is a free political right that does not come from any government, but you have it because you're a human person. That's why the Second Amendment says that people have a right to bear arms, and it is an individual right, just like any other right in the Constitution. It is an individual right that you get to exercise, and it was not created to shoot a deer. It was created to shoot tyrants. The founders of our country were obsessed with tyranny and stopping it, and it is absolutely necessary to resist encroachment by the government that the citizens be armed. And it is also important for regular citizens to be able to protect themselves from criminals because the police sometimes fail, like they did in Broward County, and cannot be everywhere at once.
Well, to answer the first point about your first question, do I think the Second Amendment should be repealed? I say no, I do not think it should be repealed. In fact, I think we should actually start acting on it, specifically the part that says, a well-regulated. The second, oh, thank you. But no, like I said, the Democrats, we're here to actually solve problems. We're not here to play armchair philosopher about what is your right and what's not your right. We're here to actually solve problems, and right now there's a problem of gun violence in this country. Even though violent crime as a whole has been going down in this country, gun deaths have been going up. That needs to be fixed. And we're the only country in the world where this is a problem. And though Donald Trump has blamed the media, he's blamed mental health. In other countries, they watch the same movies as we do. They play the same video games that we do. And they have the same mental health issues that we do. The issue here is guns, and we need proper regulations for it. There's been a lot of discussion about what those proper regulations should be. Some of the things I would like to throw out: raising the age to 21, putting bans on military-grade assault weapons, and treating guns like cars, and meaning you need a license to have them.
At this point, it seems like the vast majority of Americans agree there should be stronger gun control measures. And for us, that would include background checks, banning the sale of assault weapons, and reducing the number of rounds in ammunition magazines. And the idea here is that these measures act to reduce the level of violence to a limited degree. But ultimately, if we want to end gun violence in this country, we need to end the system of violence that is creating these sort of mass shooting events. Because this is an American problem. And coincidentally, so is the military-industrial complex, the racist criminal justice system, our lack of social services such as healthcare and education. When you look at gun violence in the context of larger social issues, not as this weird, strange, standalone phenomenon as it's often treated, it's as easy as improving social conditions for working Americans, and that comes from increasing the minimum wage and other anti-poverty measures, a single-payer healthcare system that prioritizes mental health, and any measures that would reduce the level of inequality in our society.
So, to answer your question, I 100% do not support the repeal of the Second Amendment. that would be almost as worse as repealing the First Amendment, because the whole purpose of the Second Amendment was written to protect the rest of the Constitution. There is no other law put in place in the United States that protects the rest of the Constitution, other than the right that gives the people to defend their rights themselves. Now, I know we tossed out the word. So you tossed out the word a well-regulated militia. So you're saying the government would regulate that militia, correct? Why would the government give itself the right to own firearms? There would be no right. The government can give themselves whatever they want. There's no need for the government to give themselves the right to own firearms through a militia. James Madison says in the Federalist Papers 29 and 46 discuss the role of an armed population in protecting its freedom, which they had recently been won. So I think, and sorry, to get back on the second part of your question, there are portions, I guess, of gun control I would support, but these are common sense ones which require background checks to purchase firearms. I think as we saw in the case of the Parkland shooting, this person never should have been able to obtain a gun legally. He made multiple threats months before the shooting had occurred, and what we saw was a complete, just utter failure on behalf of the Broward County Sheriff's Department and the FBI, and its field branches in Miami who refused to actually act on the problem. So I think what we should do is we should support background checks. I don't think raising the age will solve anything. I think keeping the age for handguns in the CCW is fine where it's at. But in terms of the age, keep the age at 18 and institute stricter background checks. And then I think we need to hold the FBI and law enforcement more accountable when it comes to handling situations like this.
I think it is necessary to touch on the right is not for only the militia to have guns. It says the right of the people to own guns shall not be infringed. Regulated means trained, and militia is the people. There's only 400 deaths per year from rifles. You are less likely to die in a school shooting than to be struck by lightning. Also, you don't actually need a license to have a car, you need a license to drive a car. And if you wanted to really reduce deaths, you would increase the age to drive a car and not to buy a gun, because there's way more deaths from teen car crashes. Maybe someone's going to bring up Australia, but I'll bring it up right now. Since 1990, the U.S. gun death rate has gone down by 50%, even though the number of guns we have has gone up by 50%. If you take suicides out of the gun deaths, you actually see the gun death rate in the U.S. decline. In regards to mass shootings, the U.S. is actually not the place where you're most likely to die in a mass shooting. The highest rate of death in mass shootings is in Norway, and there were also 27% more casualties from 2009 to 2015 per mass shooting incident in the European Union than in the U.S. And according to the FBI, there are more deaths by knives in the U.S. Than by rifles, 5-1.
Hello. So to go with what Charlie was saying, so the United States currently is third in murders in the world right now. So if you were to take out the 4 strictest cities with gun control, so Chicago, New Orleans, Washington, D.C., and St. Louis, these are the 4 strictest cities in the U.S. when it comes to gun control. The United States would be 4th from the bottom. In Chicago, we see 650 murders a year by guns. That's a lot of murders in a city that is supposedly very strict on its guns. And as we've seen, a majority of school shootings happen in gun-free zones. What is limiting guns going to solve in these situations? And the data is showing right now that creating more gun-free zones and limiting the guns is not doing anything to help.
Yeah, I have to agree that it's not all about the guns. There is a systemic critique. There are reasons why people are using the guns. There's a reason why in order to get our statistic correct, we have to remove suicide to get the stat that we want. And the question we have to ask ourselves is why hasn't a universal background check been passed? When there's 90% agreement on this simple reform that everyone's agreed for over a decade, 50% even of gun owners support universal background checks. So we have a super majority who support common sense, reasonable gun legislation, but gun lobbies like the NRA, manufacturers through their super PACs fund campaigns and lobbyists, ensuring their bottom line is intact. And I'd be interested if there's an alternative view of why there is this rather clear disparity between what the popular will is and what legislation is passed.
One of the things that Republicans brought up is this idea of the fact that Chicago, these big cities that have strict gun control, that they have higher rates of gun murders. There's a simple reason for that, and that's because you can just drive out of the city and pick up guns where there's significantly less regulation. In Chicago, you can just drive a few hours to Indiana, and it is significantly easier to buy a gun, and then you can just bring it back in. That's why we need national gun safety measures. It's not enough to just do it by the state. We need to tackle this problem nationally. And when we have, as the socialists brought up, organizations like the NRA that are funding politicians and preventing us from having an actual political discussion about this, then we have a problem. The current Republican representative in our district, Steve Shabbat, has received the fourth highest amount of funding from the NRA of any representative in the country. This November, you have a chance to vote him out. This November, you have a chance to actually elect a candidate who's going to go and listen to you and is going to actually fight for comprehensive gun safety legislation.
So the conversation is turning to, since we all agree to keep some version of the Second Amendment, how can we best reduce gun deaths? The highest murder rate in U.S. history was during alcohol prohibition. The second highest has been during drug prohibition. Right now, over 56% of gun homicides are due to gang-related violence, or 50% are due to drug-related violence. A lot of this has to do with the war on drugs, funding different criminal gangs, and giving them the ability to go out and shoot people. You don't see the owners of Heineken and Busch having a gunfight in the street because they can compete in the legal market and use the police as defense. As long as we keep a strong, well-funded black market going, you will see homicide occurring from those areas.
So to go back to what Democrats said, hopping the border and buying a gun is illegal. In order to purchase a gun, to purchase a gun in a state, you have to have a valid state ID of that state. I can't hop over to Indiana and buy a gun with an Ohio driver's license. I have to be within the state of Ohio to purchase a firearm. So that puts rest to the myth that they're hopping over the border in Indiana. Maybe through a private sale, sure. But through an actual legitimate retailer, it is illegal. And if retailers aren't doing that, then we should be cracking down on that. But otherwise, it is illegal. And then, secondly, I know you mentioned, the power of lobbying groups in the NRA and how money should, be out of politics. I completely agree. I think money should be out of politics because money is a very big driving factor and a very big inhibitor on what the people want and change. But that also means you have to step back from the hypocrisy. Unions and Planned Parenthood donate almost 3 times as much individually than the NRA does to politicians. Any kind of private organization, unions, Planned Parenthood, NRA, PACs, super PACs, you name it, and I want all of it out. I don't want some of it out because you disagree with their message. I want all of it out.
Well, to go and discuss this whole gun jumping the border thing one more time. For one, you can have people live in Indiana and bring guns in. There's talking about it being illegal. Yeah, it's illegal. You're talking about criminal violence. You're talking about illegal death. shooting a person is illegal. We need regulations to go and make it harder to do these illegal acts. But no, in terms of money out of politics, I would like it. In an ideal world, no, we wouldn't be getting money from unions or Planned Parenthood either. You wouldn't be getting money from NRA. No, we wouldn't be getting money from corporations. I want Citizens United repealed. I want publicly funded elections for presidents. I want to go and address this problem of money in politics if we're going to bring it up. And yeah, that's.
Briefly on money in politics, if you want to reduce money in politics, give politicians less power so it doesn't make sense to bribe them. Just saying. So if you want to go more into that, just ask during the Q&A. For now, looking at gun deaths in the United States, let's address one of the really big ones. The 1,190 people killed by police last year. Or the tens and hundreds of thousands of people killed by the US military each year overseas. If we're going to talk about gun control, we're going to talk about reducing deaths due to firearms. Let's stop giving the police full military weapons, armored personnel carriers. Let's stop drone bombing 7 countries overseas. Let's stop having military bases in over 140 countries around the world and aggravating people to come back and bomb us. If we're talking about the most destructive weapons in the United States, they are in the hands of the United States Armed Forces.
So I know that the word assault weapon also popped up too. And I think what people are very, unclear on, those who are not familiar with firearms, is that assault weapons is a very broad, if not incorrect term for many things. It is illegal to have a fully automatic firearm, which is what is considered a military-grade assault weapon. It is a weapon that can go fully automatic. In order to do that, in the United States currently, the weapon has to be made before 1986, I believe, and then you also have to pay an $800 tax stamp on it, and you have to go through months and months of filing and paperwork in order to get it. So basically, overall, you'd have to spend thousands of dollars and take months and months to get one. What the major issues that we see in the United States too is a lot of illegal guns. What you're doing by trying to enact this gun control is you're trying to take guns out of the wrong people's hands. And we want to be taking the illegal guns out of the bad people's hands instead of taking the guns out of the good people's hands. Yeah, there seems to be agreement on the public funding of elections with the exclusion of the libertarians. Who said we should just stop giving money to them. One of the ways that we can stop giving money to the elected officials is by preventing super PACs from giving money to elected officials. It's just that simple. And to be clear, I want to build off what they said with the military-industrial complex. We reject the idea that only the state can be trusted with weapons. The history of police and military interventions is one of attacks on unions in civil rights organizations, spying, provocations. We've seen too many instances the ability of the police to shoot unarmed suspects, particularly people of color without consequence. Peacefully political protests such as Occupy, demonstrations against corporate politics have been attacked by the police. So when communities have exploded in anger against police brutality, such as in Ferguson, Baltimore, military equipment has been deployed, like assault weapons that were developed for the use of war here on our soil.
I want to give a couple examples of what happens when people can't have guns to defend themselves. In 2007, Amanda Collins was raped in a University of Nevada in Reno parking garage, less than 300 yards from a campus police station. She was a concealed carry holder, but campus was a gun-free zone. So instead of defending herself and killing the man who actually went on to murder someone a couple months later, she was raped. Also in 1991, there's a video you can see where a woman who survived a mass shooting in Queen, Texas, describes how she was also a concealed carry holder, but it could be a felony in the state of Texas to bring that gun onto public property. So she watched her parents die and other people in the room because she was unable to stop the shooter. So what does happen when we try to get rid of guns? Let's compare Australia and New Zealand, very similar countries. There was a study by the Justice Policy Journal, and they found that after taking into account population size differences, Australia and New Zealand did not have statistically different trends in mass shootings before or after 1996 when Australia took the guns away. And actually, New Zealand has not had a mass shooting since 1997, despite the availability in that country of firearms banned in Australia. Likewise, we have 100 times as many guns as Australia did when they did the buyback program. There's no way you could have the United States be gun-free, and if you did, it would be a disaster.
Okay, guys, that concludes the topic portion. We're going to start the Q&A now. If we can form a line, starting at the doors there and going up and around.
It just seemed how it goes. I don't know
Looks like we're about ready. Fair warning, we normally run out of time on the Q&A, so if you want a question, you really want to get there now.
we can go back a little over.
You're on? Test. Alright. Test.
Alright, so this question's for the Democrat. You mentioned military-grade weapons, but at one point in its life, a smoothbore musket was a military weapon, and even a bolt-action rifle was a military-grade weapon. Today, what would you consider a military-grade assault weapon?
Today, hello? Oh, cool. Current military-grade weapons, let's see, I would consider the AR-15 a military-grade weapon. I'd consider, military-grade may not have been the term I wanted to use, but I do believe that weapons designed to kill as many people as possible, where you can go and kill 17 people in 6 minutes, where you can have rapid fire like that is what I believe should be illegal. And no, I'll be perfectly honest with you, this is not my area of expertise, so to say, and there's been a lot of criticism of Democrats that we don't know our guns and that we need to know more about it. And I would agree with you. I think we need to learn more about guns. I don't have much personal experience with guns. I know what I see from data, and what I see from data bases my opinion. But no, I am currently making an effort to learn more about the different types of weapons.
If the Second Amendment is to fight against the government in the event that it turns tyrannical, it kind of makes sense to ban military-grade weapons.
and especially that AR-15 is one of the most popular rifles inside the United States, and has a variety of interchangeable parts. It's often used in a way that's more similar to a hunting rifle. But banning military-grade weapons is a slippery slope to banning lots of other things, and if we're just looking at how many people an item can kill a certain amount of time, how long did it take for the truck in Paris to run over 60 or 80 people? I mean, should we ban trucks? That seems like a pretty assault-grade truck to me if it can kill 80 people in like 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I think we can dispense with the myth that if we're all armed with AR-15s, we're going to take on the U.S. Navy, the Air Force. I don't know how many of us are like fighter pilots, but I don't know that we're going to form some sort of militia. I think it's pretty well established. That's not a possibility. It's kind of a fantastical proposition, right? We're talking about where to draw the line. We're getting really specific about a particular model of AR-15, a particular type of bump stock, a certain amount of ammunition. I think even the libertarians would agree. Maybe a tactical nuke in my Chevy pickup's probably too much to drive around with. Like, we could probably regulate that. They might even agree. So it's not really about this really specific minutia, but there is a line. There is a reasonable amount of armed civilians, and where is that line? And why is it that we aren't able to pass the most common sense gun legislation?
I don't know about you guys, I've been pushing for the legalization of tanks for a very long time, but I think, to define a military-grade weapon, I think it is what is issued to the military. The standard issue rifles that have fully automatic capability that we see. The AR-15 is actually not a weapon used by our military. It is a civilian variant of a military weapon. When the AR-15 was invented, it actually had the exact same components as an M16, which was a standard issue rifle used in Vietnam and even afterwards. The only difference was that an M16 could actually fire fully automatically. Other than that, they were, that was the only major difference. So, I think we should actually look at the word and as what it is. Military grade means that it's used by the military.
In terms of the weapons being used to stand up against the United States government, besides the examples where it's actually happened, such as Vietnam or Afghanistan, where civilians armed with weapons managed to stand up against the United States government, I'm assuming they probably wouldn't actually nuke the continental United States or carpet bomb it, so we wouldn't need to face off against nukes and carpet bombs. But to go through a brief list, Mao took the guns, Stalin took the guns, Hitler took the guns, pretty much every single dictator took the guns. In 2012, Venezuela bans weapons for private citizens. 2014, their humanitarian crisis started with the government imposing martial law over the streets and just essentially destroying their constitution. Once again, it started when they took the guns.
Just wanted to point out that we're taking off guns and tactical nukes. And you could say, we could respond to that.
Wait, for tactical nukes, libertarians do not support private citizens having weapons that cannot be used without harming innocents. You can't really use a nuke without accidentally killing innocents. Other questions?
Hi everyone. I'm currently a middle childhood education major at the University of Cincinnati, and I work with the Common Core standards daily. Teachers are allowed to teach these standards in almost any way that they please. This means that local schools can choose how they teach standards on a district level. If you actually read the standards from different states, you would know that states that have not adopted Common Core standards have very similar standards to Common Core anyway. So my question for the panel is, and anybody can answer this, if not Common Core or similar standards, then what?
My problem is not against standards. My problem is against top-down standards. Even if it's mandated at the state level, you get things like how in the state of Ohio, all schools are taught towards, I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head, apologies, but there's one company that produces all the standardized tests for Ohio, and they also produce all the textbooks. So they change the test slightly every year, so you need to buy the new version of the textbook, and when you have a mandated state-down standard that you have to teach to these tests and use these textbooks, you then have that inflow of money to a bunch of lobbyists. So I'm fine with having standards. I would just say, hey, if someone wants to make a standard, do. If schools think, because I trust educators like you more than I trust a corporate bureaucrat, if you and the teachers in your school, the principal in your school, think that's the best standard for your students, you can choose whatever standard you think is best.
I actually agree with a lot of this. I think educators should have more of a say in what the standards are. I think teachers should have more of a say in enacting standard legislation. I will admit, in terms of a clear position on Common Core or pro bad, I don't know. I'll freely admit I don't know enough about the topic where I will have a clear position, and I'm not in the business of saying things just to say things. So, sorry.
Yeah, I'll say I agree with libertarians on the fact that, I think there should be the teachers giving more input. A politician who's got a degree in business or engineering or whatever probably doesn't know enough about education as much as someone who actually majored in education. So I think we should be hearing a lot more from the teachers, from both private and public schools, since it is state legislation. So I think that's a really good place to start, is give the teachers more of a voice and what they feel like would be best for the students and the children.
Going off of that, during high school, I helped out with a lot of special needs students, and they were in a lot of public schools. And a lot of times, the schoolrooms, they were all treated the same, no matter what their difficulty might be or their special need might be, and it was very generalized. So I definitely think that teachers should definitely have more control, because there's definitely some problems going on there.
Yeah, not only should teachers have more of a say in what happens in their schools, but maybe let's give them a living wage as well. West Virginia, every single teacher in the state had to go on strike for an entire week to get a 5% pay raise. Most of them were working like second jobs at gas stations and stuff just to support their families. And if we had higher funding for public education, we would be able to empower our teachers and our students to get the best educations that they possibly could.
So since we got the living.
I just want to respond to 2 points, David's point. Actually, that's just bad teaching. If you can't differentiate between your students and make the curriculum work for each of your students, then that's bad teaching. Respond to yours. I'm not going to the socialist. I'm not going to go teach in a district that doesn't pay me enough, so you can't pay your teachers enough. That's what I do there.
Every teacher in this country is valuable, and every district should pay their teachers enough.
I just have a quick, so I went to Mason, which if any of you know Mason, it's one of the better public schools around the state. And I can
assure you that the teachers at Mason made way more than any other teacher in the surrounding area. So what there seems to be a differentiate between the district you live in and the kind of wages that you're making. So I think that should be one thing addressed, maybe the policies in certain districts that are determining these wages. As we see, a teacher at Mason or a math teacher at Mason is going to make a lot more than a math teacher at a Cincinnati public schools. So I think, it's not a global thing. There are teachers out there making, above a livable wage. I'm talking six figures. I knew, since the, records are public on public schools, I know many teachers in Mason made above six figures with pensions. So, it's not this huge problem all over the world that teachers are making, crap money. There are teachers out there making a lot of money.
I just want to say that, yes, he is right. There are teachers in some areas that are making significantly more than teachers in other areas. And that is a problem. We need to address that. And if you want to go and work with us, if your politicians want to work with us, we would be happy to. But when you're cutting public education funding, when you're cutting the funding available to these poor public schools to be able to pay their teachers, then we're not going to solve this problem. And unfortunately, that's what we've been seeing in Republican-led states like West Virginia, like Oklahoma, and like Ohio.
In the New York City School District, the number of teachers, union employees making over $150,000 a year is in double digits. There are many school districts where they have full-time paid teachers who never even show up to class and just do union work. Just really 10 seconds? Sorry. I'm sorry. The problem right now is the waste. It's the extremely voted administrations where the money's getting siphoned to instead of teachers. You have over $10,000 per student in public schools. You have private schools that are able to pay teachers more on less than $4,000 a student. So it's more a question of the bloated bureaucracy and the inefficiencies in public schools. We're really good at this tech stuff, aren't we? Right? Like, hand of applause for that.
How does access to abortion affect the way society runs? And how does access to abortion change the policies that you advocate for?
So, abortion is a very complicated and very sensitive issue, and libertarians have a full range of all the way from after conception you can't do anything, all the way to you can abort it a day before it's born. Like every single personal libertarian movement is different, so we can't so I cannot speak for all libertarians on that, just saying. Access to abortion does have changes on society. If you increase availability to it, there have been shown to be reductions in back alley abortions, obviously, and there are sociologists who argue that it is a large part of ablation. There are other sociologists that argue that it has more to do with inventions like the washing machine and other household items. So that's also a debated topic to some level.
Well, I will give a decisive answer. I'm pro-choice. I think that if a woman wants access to an abortion, she should have access to an abortion. It is a matter of women's health, and it is not a matter for us to decide. In terms of what you say of the effects, I'll bring up with what the libertarian said. It goes and having access to abortion increases women's safety, as they know they'll no longer be forced, they'll no longer feel they have to go to back alley, dangerous abortions that damage their health. Also, it'll be generally good for people across the nation in the sense that you will not have to have children that you cannot afford to have. And that is bad for those children, and that is bad for the people giving birth to those children.
As a Republican, I definitely stand with the baby's life, and I'm proud to stand pro-life. That it's definitely one of the biggest issues that we're facing today. I just believe that it's, I mean, the Democrats and I'm sure the socialists will claim that it's a woman's choice, but what about the baby's choice? Also, I think that it's interesting that when there's a woman that's pregnant and is murdered, how come it's counted as a double homicide and not just the woman's life? So.
Yeah, so, as socialists, we would like to reduce the amount of abortions. We are pro-choice. I don't think anyone's pro-abortion that's pro-choice. That's an important distinction. The stats bear out, and the data's in on this. Abortions are happening. It's a lot like drug epidemics. We need to take a tact of harm reduction. We need to make them available. We need to make them affordable. We need to make them safe. They are happening in the back alleys. They are, making it so that social ills are magnified, compounded, and multiplied. Access. We could talk about second trimester. We can have, a debate about heartbeat. The data's in on this. It's anti-science at this point to say anything in less than 12 weeks is something other than probably cells, a zygote. It's about time we move into the 21st century on this.
I'd just like to point out that if you do want to actually reduce abortion in this country, there are easy ways to do it. You can go and increase access to health care so people have access to contraceptives so they don't need abortions. You can go and have comprehensive sex education in public schools so that people know how to not get pregnant on accident and have to have an abortion. Unfortunately, these are policies that my Republican politicians have not been going for. But if they were serious about fighting abortion, these are the policies they would be fighting for.
This is a complicated issue, and I'll just give you my libertarian position on it. Like Drake said, there's many different positions. Some libertarians, like myself, believe that the child is a human person and therefore has the same right to not be harmed or killed as any other person has, and that's because it is an organism of living human cells with a unique set of human DNA. If we're going to talk about things like all these things that government can do, it's just more government spending that you're trying to throw into the equation. In regards to contraceptives, there's actually no consensus on whether more contraceptives will decrease abortion. There are leading women's rights groups out there who say that more contraceptives doesn't actually lead to less abortion. One interesting stat is that if we look up hookup culture, only 50% of hookups actually involve contraceptives. People know that they're out there and they're readily available. I think that legally contraceptives should be as available as possible. But you can't just say, oh, let's just have the government spend money and we'll fix it. And in regards to women's health, over 50% of people who are aborted are women.
Y'all have been debating the drug and suicide epidemic from an economic point of view, but what about a cultural point of view? Some studies show that the drug and suicide epidemic is caused more by the American culture value and image over authentic and interpersonal relationships rather than poverty. Thoughts?
So socialists believe that the culture of a nation is shaped by its ruling class. So if the people in charge of our country base their decisions on profit, on greed, on wealth accumulation at the expense of people's health and the environment, then naturally that attitude is going to trickle into our culture. So the only way to eradicate the violence in American culture today is to eradicate the violent system that birthed it, and that means ending the competitive and predatory nature of capitalism.
In regards to suicide and drug overdose, a lot of it is cultural. Kind of what we were getting into more with drugs is more accidental overdose, which can be dramatically reduced through legalization. But in terms of purposeful suicide, a lot of that is cultural. And what's happening right now is people are trying to replace previous culture institutions that existed with the government. You have that in government cracking down on churches, even though I'm not religious. You have it in terms of how there used to be friendly societies, fraternities with shared healthcare, and those got destroyed by government Medicare. You have many different kinds of communities that have been destroyed through government involvement that used to give people the support so they didn't kill themselves, they could find help.
I'll say I do disagree with libertarians. I think it's oversimplifying the issue to blame suicides purely on government. I think it's oversimplifying it to purely blame it on capitalism. I think it's a complicated issue that that I know of, there are no clear answers for. I think we need better mental health care in this country so that when people are thinking of suicide, when people do have problems, that they have somewhere to go to, that they know that they can get treatment, if it is a mental health problem, that they can get treatment they need. And I don't want to oversimplify this issue.
Okay, guys, just to make sure that we can get to as many minutes left as possible, we're going to limit it to one response per group from here on out.
There has been discussion about restricting gun ownership to those who are mentally ill. And this has been a bipartisan point. The problem is that mentally ill is a very broad term, from mild depression to schizophrenia. 1 in 2 Americans will be diagnosed with a mental illness in their lifetime, according to NPR. Should we restrict legislation that will potentially restrict the right to bear arms for 50% of Americans?
Yeah, I agree that it's a bit of a scapegoat, I think is what you're alluding to. That think of all the mass shootings, none of them were, maybe I think 1% actually diagnosed with mental illness in a way that with proposed legislation that prevents people with screens for mental illness would have prevented these mass shootings. And in fact, I think even looking at gun deaths, it tracks with the population, what you'd see in a normal distribution, the amount of gun deaths compared to those who are mentally ill. It's not somehow I'm depressed, and now there's a much higher rate of self-inflicted. Yes, we're looking at suicide rate. Do I have more time?
So, I mean, I kind of agree with them that I don't think mental health is the only scapegoat that we can make on this, but studies have shown that if you do have a mental illness and you do own a gun, you're more than likely to use that on yourself than you are someone else. So I think part of the reason why we have that law in place is to, that's not the primary purpose, of course. It doesn't have to do with public safety, but I think part of the reason why we have that law in order to is to make sure that, we are cutting down the rate of suicide by gun. I know it's not going to stop suicide in general, but that's one of the aspects of it too, on top of, making sure that this person who is mentally unstable isn't getting their hands on a firearm and going and attacking someone for no reason just because, the mental disorder.
Yeah, to address, so you mentioned cutting off gun sales from 50% of the population. Was that, am I correct in hearing that part of your question? Yeah. Mental illness is it like, it's a spectrum, and as I've said before, it's a complicated issue. And like you said, 50% of Americans have some form of mental illness, and like I said, I do think there should be some gun ownership allowed, and I do think it would be wrong to say, just point blank, if you have a mental illness, you should not be able to own a gun. At the same point, I think there are people who have more serious mental illnesses where they should not be able to own a gun because they pose a threat to them or themselves. I don't think there's a clear line. I think that's up to medical professionals and more discussion.
A couple things under this. One, if you pass legislation like that, it would make people who actually need help, who are gun owners, less likely to get help, since obviously if you ask for help, your guns are then taken away by that legislation, which is a big issue. You can look at things like how 10% of the United States adults are on antidepressant medication of some form, all the veterans that have been at some point diagnosed with PTSD. There are a lot of other things at play, and I would like to go to a historical example of this. The United States government has a bad history of using mental illness to attack people. For example, it considered women that were too promiscuous as having mental disease and would lock them up and forcibly sterilize them. Just remember, if the government's in charge and can take away rights by calling it a mental illness means not trusting the government.
Historically, or even in present day, who do you believe is the worst president ever in line?
Woodrow Wilson. By and far, Woodrow Wilson is the worst. He got the United States into World War I, and the United States eventually World War I led to World War II, it led to the rise of Nazi Germany, it led to Stalin, it led to the death of 6 million Jews, my people, I'm Jewish. He also created the Federal Reserve, which has been the institution in the United States that has filtered wealth from the poor to the rich by inflation. He created the income tax. Some of his legislations ended up starting the war on drugs. There's some stuff with various drug taxes. He started all of the programs that are a problem in the United States today. So, Wilson.
Well, I obviously haven't thought about this topic as much as he has. You're clearly not a fan of Wilson. But no, off the top, I'm not usually a person to go give rankings like that, but off the top of my head, I would say Andrew Johnson. He went and failed to act on many of our problems with slavery, with race, and his ineptitude led to the Civil War, which I think is one of the greatest American tragedies that we're still suffering from today.
No, I completely agree with, actually, that was one of my answers was either going to be Jerry Carter or Woodrow Wilson. You've basically already given the reason for Woodrow Wilson. It led to the destabilization of Europe and would eventually lead to the rise of Nazi Germany. And then, just a big one too, he was a very, very prominent anti-Semite racist too, so. I'm going to go with a contemporary example. I'm going to connect more with the room. George Bush, who is George W. Bush, most recently, expanded endless war, warrantless wiretapping, funding for the war machine, facilitated the economic crash, literally torture in chief. He could dodge a shoe on stage, but his economic policies we're still suffering from. We've gone from 3 wars to 7, even though we've changed administrations. That's because under Bush, the presidency got the ability to declare war without Congress's approval. He demanded that he have that right after 9/11. A lot of what we're in right now, we can attribute to George Bush.
Thanks for not throwing shoes on the way. Really appreciate it. Still not.
Yeah, so I'd like to start with the socialist view, but I'd like to go all the way down the line. I would just like to hear each group's expectations and ideas of what creating a $15 minimum wage would look like and what the ramifications of that would be in society.
Yeah, so they've done this in Seattle, in LA. I think it'll be 20 by 2022. Minimum wage of $20. It's important that it's attached to inflation. The legislation we're looking at in California is attached to inflation. What happens is that we all can't afford hamburgers anymore, and we can get a job. No, that's not what happens. In fact, it's a 5% increase on a hamburger to pay your employees. A living wage, if we agree that somebody is doing a job for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, they should also be able to put food on the table. They shouldn't be work to the bone. You see an increase in spending. If you put money in people's pockets, they spend it. It's good all around. I can almost find nothing bad to say about it.
So to go off what they're saying, they're talking about Seattle, San Francisco, LA. So what they fail to neglect is how the $15 minimum wage is killing small family-owned businesses there who cannot afford to pay a $15 minimum wage. Now, you can argue that, sure, big corporations like McDonald's, larger, like we see with Fifth Third, they can probably afford to pay a $15 minimum wage. Would that be fair, constitutional? We can argue about that all day. But a $15 minimum wage, what that means is that means the death of the small family-owned business who cannot afford, as we saw with Obamacare. These small family-owned businesses are being forced to cover health care for their employees, even though they cannot afford to pay for that health care in general. So what we've seen with those in the cities that's been enacted is we've seen many small family-owned businesses fall apart or hire less people because they just cannot afford a $15 minimum wage.
I think there's a distinction to be made between making a $15 minimum wage national and making it on regional, such as city or statewide levels. In terms of a $15 minimum wage on a national scale, I know a lot of Democrats aren't in support on it. I'm honestly still looking into the data because I hate to say it, but to some level I will agree that that for a lot of smaller communities where there's less income available, having a $15 minimum wage in like a small town in Oklahoma may be harmful to smaller businesses. On a national level, I do think it needs to be raised, and I do think it needs to be raised adjusted to inflation. I know 10-10, a lot of economists have said is a good level, but yeah, I think raising the minimum wage does need to happen, and for cities that can afford it, they should.
In 1948, black unemployment was at 9%, white unemployment was at 10%. Starting in 1960, when the minimum wage covered all jobs increased in inflation, black unemployment has consistently been over 20% and double that of white unemployment, and is currently over 50%. What the minimum wage does is it says that people with the least skills are not able to get jobs and build their skill base. That's the reason the last job that I took was under minimum wage, because I wanted to gain skills so future employers would hire me. I am against minimum wage as a whole. I do not think it should exist. It is cutting the rugs out of the lot of the people that need the most help in the economy. It is destroying tons of jobs, things like ushers, things like gas station attendants, except for in Oklahoma, whatever that state is. And I'd also like to point out that in Puerto Rico, because that is affected by U.S. minimum wage law, the most recent minimum wage increase caused unemployment to go over 40%, and a $15 minimum wage would literally destroy Puerto Rico. So, come to Puerto Rico.
Hey everyone. So just to preface this question, this isn't a question on whether the free market is good or bad. I certainly see the value of voluntary exchange, which capitalism facilitates in, which thusly drives innovation and overall progress for society. However, does an unregulated market always empower the individuals? Are some things, when made profitable, are actually negatives for society and by extension individuals as a whole, as is the case with private prisons, which draw profit and incentivize incarceration? Is there, if this isn't a byproduct of some aspects of certain markets being unregulated or improperly profit-driven, then what is it?
I assume this question is directed at us primarily. For private prisons, that is entirely a misnomer. So think about it. If you have a private prison, the government chooses who goes there. The government chooses which prison they go to. There's regional monopolies given. The government chooses how much is paid to the prison. The government chooses what can force them to remain there. private prisons are really fascist prisons that are misnamed. So that is not a free market in any way. A more free market example would be if you could pick between multiple prisons and picked one that like fit you better. But that's a long discussion I'd like to have after the debate is over. In general, a free market serves better in pretty much every single capacity of different markets and can self-regulate through things like lawsuits, through things like laboratory testing and other various systems that have existed in US history and the rest of the world. And I'd love to discuss this later. That's a really long topic to talk about.
So, as you said, that is a very long topic to talk about. But when you brought up private prisons, and specifically you brought up the idea of profit incentives creating things that are bad for society. And yes, I do think there are a lot of cases where having a profit incentive, where the goal is to get money, goes against what the goal of society wants. For instance, I agree with you with private prisons. You have examples of those prisons saying that they won't go and provide services if government doesn't provide a certain number of prisoners, which I think is ridiculous. Government shouldn't be saying, okay, we'll provide you X number of prisoners. The goal should be to have as few prisoners as possible and to reform those prisoners. And the private prisons, to cut costs, haven't been doing either.
So I think that private profit and public good can go kind of hand in hand. I mean, how many here, wanted an iPhone? Well, in order to get an iPhone, Apple has to make money to run their business to make iPhones and then sell other people. That's sort of the way our market works. Is just one large cycle of money going in and out, in and out, in and out. And I know one of the big terms that people like to toss around is crony capitalism, but they don't exactly know what crony capitalism specifically defines. So crony capitalism is actually specifically defined as not just corrupt businessmen, it's actually when the private market and these private businessmen basically work with government officials to rig markets and rig them in their favor. That is completely against any kind of free market principle, because the free market principle is to keep the government out of the market. Crony capitalism really shouldn't include the term capitalism because it goes against the idea of government staying out of the market. Yeah, we call it capitalism because it's what's mostly known as in this idealistic free market that could exist where perfect exchange happens with no time and space or all these other variables are removed. Doesn't exist for a reason because it can't exist. And when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about the dynamic nature of our economic society, the political system. The one that we have right now that we know to be capitalism, not some other thing that we'll choose to define as crony or not crony or doesn't exist. It's not the perfect capitalist system. As socialists, when we're talking about government solving issues, we're not also talking about this government that doesn't exist, some abstraction of Big Brother, this authoritative, unaccountable government. In fact, that's what we have right now. And when we talk about government, rather we're talking about a democratic solution with collective decision-making at its core that could exist.
Assuming the legalization of marijuana and heroin, what limitations would be placed on high-risk jobs, say airline pilots and mechanics?
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, I can clarify. So he's saying if you were to legalize marijuana or heroin, what sort of restrictions would you place on certain jobs, such as being a doctor, being an airline pilot, things that you have a lot of responsibilities?
Currently, there's no testing on surgeons for any substances, but if you are on parole, if you're wanting to get a job, you have extensive drug testing. We do not test our elected officials for drugs before they cast a vote in Congress. So bringing up pilots, post-legalization, I think we've got some things we can talk about right now to where it's screwed up, it's misaligned, it's not serving the public interest. In fact, it's keeping people in a cycle of poverty where they've been criminalized and they're in that prison pipeline and put back out without proper care in any way to actually get back. So what I think is that we should keep the same restrictions we have as with alcohol. So if you have to make a flight from New York to LA, don't show up trash to pilot the plane. same thing should be done. If I'm performing open heart surgery, don't come in after I've, taken a couple rips of a joint, Something as simple as that, I think what it is if we do enact some kind of special restrictions on it that has to be written into law, it just shows that how stupid government officials think that their people actually are, and how they think that people lack common sense to not show up and operate heavy machinery or not cut open someone and perform heart surgery, while under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
For what I do want to preface this, I am by no means in favor of the legalization of heroin. I support legalization of marijuana, not heroin. But yeah, no, a lot of it is what they say. It's sort of common sense things. I don't think you should ever, I agree with a lot of socialists that mandatory drug testing for certain jobs is bad and has been used to harm people. But in a sense, for stuff where it's directly impacting how you're working and the safety of others, so like flying a plane or something like that, I don't think you should show up to fly a plane or operate a crane stoned or high.
I think the others made good points, and I'd like to add that this is how libertarians see the world working ideally in a broader sense, that people actually aren't that stupid, and no employer wants their employees to fly their planes or do whatever the job is while high or drunk, and employers are smart enough to write that into contracts because you can do that privately, you don't need Big Brother telling you what to do, and libertarians feel that that's a better way for society to work, where employers and employees get to make decisions about how things will, that we get to negotiate on the way society will run and the way their job will function, and that we don't need government to force employers and employees to do or not to do certain things because they should be able to run their own lives.
Okay, so my question is mainly for the socialists. You guys mentioned having like stricter gun laws. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but with 3D printers and everything, you're able to print off bump stocks and everything else. So my question is, what will tougher laws accomplish when there are already roughly 2 guns in circulation for every American adult, and with the access to 3D printers and being able to build guns in your own home?
I was only restating what the majority of Americans are calling for right now. Overall, you're right. It's not going to solve the problem because, like I keep saying over and over again, this is a systemic issue stemming from economic inequality that makes all of our lives harder than it needs to. So I guess if you want to 3D print a gun, that's completely fine with me, but ultimately we need to be organizing and calling for a safer and healthier society.
So yeah, no, I do know what you talked about as 3D guns. I've read stuff about that, and I think it's concerning. I think it should be illegal to 3D print guns or to 3D print bump stocks. What you say in terms of enforcement, I don't know a clear answer as to how you're going to enforce it in terms of whether that's saying it is illegal to go and distribute the code that 3D prints bump stocks and guns. I would like to look more into that. But in terms of part of what you seem to be suggesting is why create laws for it when it's going to happen anyway. I think there should I think it's kind of a cop-out to say there shouldn't be regulations if you think people are going to avoid regulations.
It's pretty much impossible to enforce some of that like that because of 3D printers. You even have stuff like how in Brazil the mafia actually built their own gun manufacturing factories. Although I do agree it is kind of a cop-out to say we shouldn't have this laws can't be enforced. By that argument you would not have anti-murder laws. But as a whole, you just don't ban the guns. Let people do what they want because if someone has a gun they're doing it doesn't hurt anyone else, they should be allowed to do it. And cracking down on that would take such an authoritarian government spying on your every move that it's insane. Although we're already almost there.
short round of applause for last question.
Okay, so I guess and this is my final question would be, so I guess mostly for the Democrats and the socialists. So I've heard this phrase around a lot, that Trump is like Hitler, or Trump is literally Hitler. I mean, if Trump is literally Hitler, what are you gonna do? Like, this whole, I mean, that's my question. Like, how can you liken someone to someone like Hitler and then at the same time want to take away people's rights?
Yeah. Well, I'll say I don't think Trump is literally Hitler. I think he's a terrible president. I think he's inept. I think all of his decisions have been terrible. But I don't believe that it's smart or good to just throw around calling people Hitler. I think it negates the actual atrocities he had. I think we can go and talk about the failures of Trump without comparing him to Hitler. So to answer your question, I don't believe that Trump is literally Hitler.
Socialists also don't believe that Trump is Hitler. We believe that he's Trump. And ultimately, he is a symptom of a society in crisis. He said something to people that really resonated with them. He said, your life is hard and the government is making it harder. And we say that your life is hard, but it's the capitalist class and the 1% that is making it harder. And that's really who our enemy should be here.
Okay, guys, that wraps it up. Thank you very much for coming. For those of you who did sign up with us, we will be sending out an email with a survey link for that. So if you could please fill that out so that we can try to improve this for the future for you guys. Also, anyone who has a question, can you see Nicole about signing a release for her video? And we will be having a social at Max Pizza Pub after this if you'd like to talk amongst yourselves or with any of the debaters. We hope to see you there.
Or just come on up. We don't fight.
Everyone in the audience, ready to break up? Continue with the talk.
Sir, I was wondering if you happen to decide what it is. Would I be, I'm sorry, I'm running out of space.